In this episode of Yankee Garage, we're going to be replacing the front brake pads on the 99 Triumph Speed Triple. This also works for a 2000 and 2001. To do the job, you're going to need a ratchet and a 14mm socket, a torque wrench set to 40 Newton meters, an 8mm combination wrench, a 5mm Allen wrench, needle nose pliers, rubber gloves, some good shop towels, highly absorbent, an old water bottle, some brake bleeding hose or tubing with a retainer, some sort of rubber band. I'm using a hair tie. These are the brake pads that I'm using. I will flip those over so that you can see the numbers on them if you want to use the same kind. .4 brake fluid, and some sort of contact cleaner. I'm using the mass airflow sensor cleaner, and a shop towel or a microfiber cloth. Alright, just tear yourself off a shop towel, and we're going to start by folding it in half. It doesn't have to be perfect, the corners don't have to be perfect, it just has to have some sort of function. Once you fold it in half, we're just going to fold it the long way one more time. Just fold it tight, and then just set it up against the reservoir. I'm just going to fold this one more time, and then you're just going to make a collar out of it, kind of like when you're getting a haircut. Just going to wrap that around the neck of the reservoir, nice and tight. And then once you got it all set, just go ahead and fasten that down with a hair tie. You can also use a rubber band if you have a rubber band. I've even seen people use bungee cords. Alright, just go ahead and get that set up. And I'm just going to take one more paper towel, fold it in half, and create a little dribble bib just in case we have a little bit more of a splash. I feel it's better to be safe than to have to clean up a mess. Brake fluid tends to be pretty nasty. Alright, and then just go ahead and unscrew the cap of the brake fluid reservoir. I like to unscrew it the whole way and just take it completely off. And we'll just go ahead and set the cap and the seal aside. And let's get started with the 14mm socket and ratchet. You're just going to break loose the two mounting bolts that are holding the brake caliper to the front forks. Try not to bust a knuckle when trying to break these loose. Once they're loose, go ahead and unscrew them all the way out and set them aside. Once these are off, this will allow us to remove the brake caliper all by itself. Just give it a jiggle, it comes right out. As you can see, it was definitely time to change these pads. And we're just going to flip that over. You may or may not have a cotter pin that you need to remove. If so, just take your needle nose pliers, and we're going to squeeze the cotter pin together so that we can remove it. This may take some finagling. Just be patient, try and use some finesse, and try not to scrape up the caliper with those needle nose pliers. Once you have the fins together, it should just pull right out. And you can go ahead and set that aside. And just give it another turn. Now it's time to get the 5mm Allen wrench, and we're going to unscrew and remove the retaining bolt. Get a good grip. It's going to be in there tight, and bang. just go ahead and screw that out all the way. Once it's all the way screwed out, you'll just have to remove it manually. You just put a little bit of a tension on the caliper and it just pulls right out. After that, go ahead and remove the brake pad spring and set that aside. Now, the old pads just dump right out. At this point, we just need to squeeze those pistons all the way back as far as possible. This can be done by hand. You can also use the old pads, keep them in there and use a screwdriver or something else to pry them apart. I prefer not to. Alright, now I'm just going to get our microfiber cloth, spray some contact cleaner on it. I'm using the mass airflow sensor cleaner, and we're just going to go ahead and clean off the retaining bolt, and we are going to go ahead and clean off the brake pad spring. Just make sure it gets clean, and also make sure you have some decent ventilation. The mass airflow sensor cleaner vapors can wreak havoc on a respiratory system. Alright, next it's time to open up the brake pad package. I'm using a box cutter. You can use a chainsaw, whatever your weapon of choice is. I'm just going to take one of these out, and I'm going to stack it up next to one of the old brake pads. I just want to take this opportunity to double check and make sure that the brake pad profile on the new brake pad is the same as the brake pad profile on the old brake pad. Once you're satisfied that you have the right brake pads, you can go ahead and take the next one out. Put them together. I like to put them together kind of like pages of a book. The flat side is going to go down so that the top side, which is the one with the holes in it, is going to match up with the holes in the caliper. You can just load them in there both at the same time. Nice and easy. Try not to scrape anything up. And once you have them in there, just go ahead and turn the caliper over. Make sure you keep your finger on the back side of those pads. You don't want them to fall out once you turn the pad over to put the retaining bolt in. Go ahead and lay the brake pad spring down on top of the pads. You can only go in there one way, and then with one hand you're going to put some tension on the brake pad spring and keep a hold of those brake pads from the bottom. And now we can go ahead and put the brake pad retaining bolt back into the caliper. Bolt should go through all the holes and on top of the brake pad spring. Once you have it all the way through, grab your 5mm Allen wrench and secure it down. Grab the cotter pin and just going to put it right back in the same way it came out. Just going to push that in so that both fins are on the inside. Push that all the way through. You can grab your needle nose pliers to give you a hand with that. Just give it a little push. And then once the cotter pin is all the way through, fillet those fins. You just fold one on each side, curl them around, and give them a squeeze. You kind of want these cotter pins as close to the bolt as possible. Alright, once you're satisfied with that, hopefully you backed off the pistons enough on both sides so that you can have enough room between those brake pads to have one brake pad on each side of the rotor. Alright, so just go ahead and set that up. You just spread those apart. This is kind of the hardest part of the whole operation. Just remember to be gentle and be patient. It can only go on there one way. And then once you snap it in place, go ahead and push it forward so that the mounting holes match up with the mounting bracket. Just like that. And grab your two mounting bolts. I'm going to screw those back in. You can screw them both back in, hand tight. We're going to finish off with the torque wrench. This should be set to 40 Newton meters. The conversion for that is 29.5 pounds. Go ahead and tighten to that. Just double check the retaining bolt with a 5mm Allen wrench. Now it's time to do the other side. We're going to do the right side the same way that we did the left side. So by now you should have had some practice, and it should go a little bit smoother this time. Once again, we're going to go ahead and break loose the two mounting bolts that are holding the brake caliper to the mounting bracket. Unscrew them all the way, take them both out, and set them aside. Get a hold of the brake caliper. Just kind of give it a jiggle or two. And remove it all the way. All right, go ahead and turn that to where you can get a hold of the cotter pin, and we're going to remove the cotter pin. So we're just going to bring the two fins of the cotter pin together with our needle nose pliers. Again, you just want to make sure that you're gentle, precise. You want to be using finesse. Try not to scrape up the calipers with the pliers. And then once you got the fins squeezed together, you should be able to remove the cotter pin just by pulling it out. And once the cotter pin is out, you can set that aside. All right, once again, grab your 5mm Allen wrench. And we're going to go ahead and break loose and remove the retaining bolt that is holding the brake pads inside the caliper. Get a good grip. Unscrew that all the way out. And then you'll have to pull it out manually again. Sometimes it helps to put a little bit of tension on the spring, but it should just come right out. Set that aside and grab the spring, set that aside, and at this point you can take the brake pads out, or you can use a screwdriver and pry the two pistons apart. So we're going to try and squeeze those pistons on each side as far back as possible. so that we can have enough space for the new pads to fit in there and go over the rotors. Once again, while I've got the retaining bolt off and the spring off, I'm just going to go ahead and clean both of those with a microfiber cloth and some contact cleaner, or I'm using the mass airflow sensor cleaner. Alright, by now we should know that the brake pads are going to work. Hopefully you bought 2 sets, one for each side. Let's go ahead and load those pads in there, just like book pages. Or cassettes, however old you are. And keep that in place with your fingers while you turn the brake caliper over. And then it's time to grab the spring, lay that down, make sure the stem goes in between the 2 brake pads, and grab the retaining bolt. And we're going to go ahead and put the retaining bolt back in. It helps to put a little bit of tension on the back of the spring. That way the bolt goes through the holes and across the back on top of the brake pad spring. Once you get it all the way in there, go ahead and take your 5mm Allen wrench and tighten that down. Alright, looks like I ripped a glove, so it's time to put a fresh glove on. Alright, with a fresh glove, we can go ahead and finish the job. We're going to spread apart the 2 brake pads so that one brake pad fits on each side of the rotor. Once again, just be patient. This is the most difficult part. Take your time, be gentle. Use a little persuasion. Once you feel it snap into place, you can just go ahead and push it forward. Line up the holes of the mounting bracket and the caliper. And take those 2 mounting bolts, reinsert those. Go ahead and tighten both of those down. You can do it by hand. We're going to finish that off with our torque wrench. Go ahead and grab the torque wrench, set to 40 Newton meters or 29.5 pounds. Tighten it down so you hear it click. And once again, just double check, tighten the retaining bolt with your 5mm Allen wrench. Alright, at this point it's time to pump the brake lever. It can take up to 10 pumps until you finally get some resistance, or an acceptable resistance to where it should be. If you don't get the resistance, you have air in the line, and we need to bleed those brakes. This is how we're going to do it. Go ahead and grab your water bottle. Poke a hole in the cap just big enough for the brake bleeding hose to fit through. Poke the hose through the cap so that the retainer is on the bottom or the inside of the cap. Once you have the hose all the way through the cap with the retainer underneath, just go ahead and screw the cap back up on top of the bottle so that it's tight. This is going to catch any excess brake fluid as we bleed the brakes. All right. Now go ahead and just take the cap off the brake bleeding valve. Grab your 8mm wrench, and with the box end, you're going to slide it all the way to the back over the bolt, and then grab your brake bleeding hose and slide that over the nipple of the bleeder valve. Alright, this is the sequence for bleeding your brakes. You have to do it in this order and this order alone. This is a nursery rhyme. Squeeze the lever and hold it closed. Open the valve, the bubble flows. Close the valve, release the lever, then check the fluid level. After 4 or 5 of these cycles, you'll need to put some more brake fluid in there, and just go ahead and grab the .4 brake fluid and top it off. It may take a few cycles of bleeding the brake using the exact sequence that I just mentioned before you finally get the resistance that you're looking for. Once you finally are satisfied with enough brake pressure, go ahead and remove the brake bleeding tube and the bottle and the wrench. Go ahead and wipe off the bleeder valve and replace the cap. Screw the reservoir cap back on and remove the paper towel collar and give it a nice little wipe down. Make sure you don't have any excess brake fluid dripping anywhere. It's time to take the bike for a test ride. I would suggest just going nice and easy around the block, just to make sure that the brakes are working exactly as you need it to. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you learned something. Hope this worked out for you, and I hope it saved you some money. Thanks.